Hi, folks. Welcome. Feel free to get settled in. We'll start in a few moments. And as you're waiting, feel free to introduce yourself on the chat, an organization, if you're affiliated with that, and where you're calling in from. There might also be a poll that shows up, and feel free to answer that poll. Welcome, folks. We'll give it another minute or so for people to trickle in, but feel free to respond to the poll. I see you guys already doing that, and introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, Danette. Good to see you. Hi, Christy. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Shana Levitan. I'm a policy analyst at EdTrust, and I'm very happy to welcome you to part 3 of our webinar series, all about resource equity in action. And today, specifically, we'll be taking a deep dive into what it means to ensure that your advocacy's impact is measured in a strong way, and how to sustain the momentum of your efforts. And this is the last webinar in the Alliance for Resource Equity webinar series. And as a point of background, the Alliance for Resource Equity is a partnership between EdTrust and Education Resource Strategies, or ERS for short. And we're focused on making sure that school systems and communities are working together to make sure that they are mobilizing the right combination and distribution of resources so that there are high quality learning experiences for every student. And so our hope with these webinars, as well as like our full toolkit, our newsletter, the supplemental resources that we put out, our goal with those is to help advocates and districts think about resources in a bit of a broader way. So expanding our understanding to consider resources across 10 key dimensions, things like teacher quality and diversity, facilities, the curriculum. So those 10 key dimensions, and to consider how to equitably allocate resources associated that go beyond money. So also considering things like people, time, and capacity as resources, and to also ask questions not only about how much money, but also how well that money is being used across those dimensions, specifically in service of driving more equitable opportunities in your community. And so I think there was a poll that was launched that I would love to share out. I think there was a bit of a mix of folks that said they were tracking measurement and folks that weren't. So excited to build on that knowledge or to perhaps provide a bit of a foundation. And then we also asked about common ways that you are measuring impact, or maybe you hope to begin to. And so it seems like there was a wide range, things like story collection, engagement tracking, and so we'll hit upon some of those as key themes later in the discussion. But before we dive into all of that, I want to take a step back. Here was the poll. And here are the learning objectives for today. So we're hoping at the end of the webinar, we can help understand the benefits for measuring impact, and the implications that it can have on your the longevity of your campaign. Hoping that you can also identify multiple methods. We began to in the poll, and then learn best practices for implementing impact measurement into your work and also analyzing its results and what it means for your work going forward. And so here's where we have been with the first part of our first two parts of our webinar series, I should say. And we considered how to leverage data for advocacy. We considered how to develop a really compelling message for your advocacy. And so we discussed those two topics as ways to put resource equity into action. So we talked about best practices, considerations, very practical tools you can use. But how do you know if these things and all of the other things that you're doing as an advocate are working as intended, so to drive positive change? And also, why does that matter in the first place? Like, why should we be spending time and energy here? Well, I like to think of like measuring impact as a bit of like a visualization of pulling out a measuring tape and like actually kind of understanding how your efforts are stacking up in service of larger goals. But I also think that measuring impact goes beyond that. I think measuring impact also strong impact measurement acts like holding up a mirror to reflect on the full initiative and like its progress more broadly. And also like a flashlight, to continue on different tools, that analogy, like a flashlight to shed light for further action and to better illuminate yourself for broader reach and support. So that's where we hope to go today with this conversation. So to just add on to that, why is impact measurement important? 3 key reasons we want to voice over briefly. The first is that it provides honest, actionable insights that allow for continuous improvement. Continuous improvement is key to impact measurement because it can help turn data into information and then information into insight that you can always use to drive your work forward. And doing that allows you to target the limited resources that you have towards the most effective strategies to keep doing what you're doing and improve upon it, and helps you monitor progress and change course as necessary. Second, it helps demonstrate your impact to funders and supporters. Can't deny that that's a key part of some of the work that we do. Funding is critical for campaign sustainability, and funders and contributors, they want to see impact and they want to see results. So that can help as you begin to continue to bolster relationships with current funders and individual contributors, and then also lead in your like pitching and your increase of funding over the length of your campaign from new sources as well, from your perspective contributors or funders. And then lastly, it builds credibility and sustains your momentum. So proof points can really speak to your impact to help you gain credibility of your really good work and reach a wider network of influence. Now people start, knowing what you're doing in your name and see it as a really valuable effort. And impact metrics can also build support among your base and remind them of why they're doing this in the first place. Some of this advocacy work can be quite exhausting, but having some really clear impact metrics are good reminders to kind of serve as an example of the why. Whoops. So those are just 3 key reasons why impact measurement is important. And to kind of bring this into more of a tangible context, I'm really excited that we will have the Executive Director of EdTrust-Tennessee engage us in a quick presentation, then we'll do a Q&A, and I'll pass it over to my colleague Emily to introduce Gini Pupo-Walker.
Thanks so much, Shayna. Hi, all. Great to see you all today. Thanks for joining. My name is Emily Young. I'm an associate for advocacy and engagement here at EdTrust, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce Gini Pupo-Walker today. Gini brings more than 20 years of work in education as a teacher, an administrator, and a nonprofit leader. She currently serves as the Executive Director of EdTrust-Tennessee, where she works alongside advocacy organizations and stakeholders to increase educational opportunity and achievement among historically underserved students. Prior to joining EdTrust, Gini worked at Conexión Americas, where she led education programs and advocacy efforts to improve outcomes for Latino students across Tennessee. And before that, she worked in education as a teacher, both the high school and the college level, and was the Executive Director of Family and Community Partnerships at Metro Nashville Public Schools. She was elected to the school board in Nashville in 2018 and served her time during the pandemic, which I'm sure she has a number of stories from. And as a native of Nashville, she holds a master's degree from both Tennessee State University in Education Administration and Indiana University in History, as well as a bachelor's degree from Indiana University as well. So Gini, I'll pass it on to you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you for the invitation. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today. Give me 1 second to share my screen. All right. How does that look? Can I get somebody to let me know? Look okay?
Gini, we're seeing like the
View?
yeah, the
Hang
one
on.
that you see when you're on the other.
All right, hang on. I was trying to be fancy and put this on my,
If it happens again, there's just a quick fix that we can talk you through as well, if that is helpful.
hang on. 1 sec. Maybe I might need you to do that. Let's see.
Sure thing.
Let me
Yeah.
try this.
Oh, perfect. That worked. You're good to go.
Okay, great. Okay, so it's good to be here with everybody. I'm Gini Pupo-Walker. I run our EdTrust-Tennessee office. We've been open for a little over 4 years now, open to January 2020. And from our inception, we have really baked evaluation into our theory of change, and I'll talk in some detail about that. So first, let's see if I can forward this slide here. Did that forward to you for you all?
Yes. Yep.
Okay. So first I want to just talk a little bit about our philosophy around evaluation. So I'm looking at my other screen, so it's kind of confusing to you. I'm looking away. So we have a dedicated external evaluator. This is somebody I've known for many, many years. I've worked with her when I was in the school system. She would be an evaluator for large federal grants. And I hired her as a consultant to help us build out our evaluation strategy for Education Trust Tennessee. And I have kept her on for the last 4 years. And she is really an additional team member in a lot of ways. She comes to almost every team meeting. She comes to a lot of our events, but she's really plugged into all facets of our work. And so we really believe that evaluation has to be a central component of the work, not an afterthought, not something you do when a grant report is due or when you need to make a presentation, but really it's day in and day out. It's part of the sort of the fabric of how you operate. So ongoing informing program improvement in real time, meaning getting that feedback from survey results, from interviews, from focus groups, from whatever that looks like, and then turning around and using it to adjust and adapt, which is what we try to do. It is essential on our team to make sure every single member of our team understands Kelly's role and the role of evaluation. Everyone has a role to play in contributing to our evaluation strategy. And as I'm sure all of you know, good evaluation helps support a fundraising strategy and showing our impact. And it also is helpful when talking with staff during evaluation time, mid-year and final evaluation, and offering feedback based on what we hear from our evaluation. So these are the 5 components of how we kind of operate, and I'm going to break down a lot of these here in a minute. So the first most foundational piece is our logic model. If you don't know what a logic model is, I encourage you to literally Google it. Kellogg Foundation puts out a lot of good information on designing and building the essential components of a logic model. I'll walk through ours in just a minute. We also have tools that we use for tracking a whole host of things, and I've tried to just here in bold print outline a few of the things that we use very, very regularly, or Kelly does. And so she uses SurveyMonkey all the time. So we she offers a survey after every event we have, after every webinar. And she also does a lot of one-on-one interviews with our student leaders, with our partners, we do grants to our sub-grantees. And all of that she sort of compiles into reports for us that are very, very user-friendly. We also track all of our communication. So how many people are going to our website, which pages are they going to, how much has our newsletter subscription list grown, how much is our social media followers grown, how much is the media mentioning us, citing us, looking for us for quotes. And then we also track engagement. List management is an essential part of organizing and advocacy. So making sure you are asking the right questions every time someone registers for an event or signs up for your newsletter, understanding where they live, their zip code, with the organization they're with. All of that becomes very, very useful in advocacy. Making sure you know how to segment and tag all those people is really important. Kelly does that for us. And then our team does activity logs. So our government relations team, every time they have a legislative meeting, they kind of log it really quickly into their meeting log, and Kelly can then cite how many meetings have been had, among many other things. We also use Mentimeter a lot of times for meetings with our alliance, the coalition we lead, as just interactive ways to gather information and opinion. And then we also do a lot of legislative bill tracking, and track bills that we've opposed or we support, and the fate of those bills and our role in that. So these are just an example of different ways that we monitor and track our work. So this is our logic model that Kelly has designed for us. This is a couple of years old now, and Emily's going to put in the chat a link to this document. So this is something that is a pretty standard sort of structure for a logic model, and you can see that there are inputs. I don't want to assume you know everything about logic models. You might, but I'm going to pretend like you don't. And so the inputs are really the things that you bring to the table. What do you offer? What do you have? What is your organization have that you bring to conduct this work that are assets for you? And so you can see here she defines those by capacity, and by preparation and planning. And then we are very focused on the activities that we do to achieve our goals. And so she, as she says here, what is proposed to be done. So these are all the different ways we conduct our advocacy work at EdTrust-Tennessee. And she has lists here, examples of things that we've done in each of those categories. And then she has interim outcomes. And so outcomes don't have to be bill passage or bill failure. Outcomes can be defined in many different ways: increasing capacity, increasing number of partners, increasing collaboration, recruiting new champions, new advocates, increased funding, more diversified funding, et cetera, but also a whole host of ways that we track policy, and how we sort of engage with policy. And you can see there are a whole list of ways that we do that. And then finally, our policy goals are our outcomes, right? And so these are fundamentally how we ultimately decide if we're successful at the end of the day, the most concrete way to show that. And sometimes it is not about getting a policy when. It might be strictly around keeping a law in place. It might be around implementation of a law. It might be a state board policy that we support and we're monitoring. So it can look a lot of different ways. And then at the very bottom, you'll see that she lists here all of the potential barriers or contextual information that will, inform our strategy here. And you can see all of the different ways that Tennessee's environment impacts our ability to do our work. And so it is not unusual for us to be in opposition to legislative leadership and to the governor's agenda. There are times when we're aligned, but many times we are in an oppositional kind of posture. And so we have to be really smart about our campaigns and know what we're doing. And so this is just an important tool that we use. Whenever I bring on a new staff member, we walk them through this tool. We also share this with all of our partners for their own use. So I'm going to just do a quick case study of a campaign that we had called Dollars and Cents. And so in 2020, the year we opened, we knew we wanted to work on funding reform in Tennessee, school K-12 funding reform. And so we launched in early 2020. By late 2020, we had planned and developed out a 7-session series called Dollars and Cents. There should be a link in the chat for our Dollars and Cents website. And that series was public facing. It was once a month. It was meant to be sort of one of those scaffolding kind of experiences where we were teaching people soup to nuts how school funding worked, what the problem was with Tennessee's formula, what the solutions were, and then how to advocate for those. So at the same time, we launched a School Finance Institute with partner organizations, 11 of them, who we had a deep dive with over those same 7 months, and they each had an advocacy project. And so with that, those two strategies, Kelly developed surveys for both, surveys for each of the 7 sessions for Dollars and Cents, and each of the 7 sessions for our Institute members. She also did a network exercise that I'll talk about in a minute. And then she created an interview protocol. She interviewed each of those members of the Institute on beforehand, and then at the end to sort of understand how well their capacity grew and their confidence around funding reform advocacy. And then in 2021, we launched our Dollars and Cents series in January, and Kelly conducted network interviews with each of our Institute members as well, and surveys, as I mentioned. And then we were very surprised. We thought we had a 3 or 4 year runway. The governor announced later that year in October that he was going to review our funding formula and replace it. And so we quickly rallied to produce materials, briefs, memos, tools. Those are all on the website that was shared just a minute ago in the chat. And so we tracked all kinds of things that all of the materials we had on our website, how many downloads there were. We tried to see how many times they were referenced. And we also monitored media mentions of our materials. And those materials were used quite a bit. We also had the governor announced like 15 or 16 steering committees around funding reform, and we had partners on each of those committees. So we tracked their attendance and their use of our materials. We met with each of them prior to their committee meetings to really equip them to sit in those meetings. And then a bill was introduced in 2022. And so as soon as the bill was introduced, we began to evaluate the bill against sort of our priorities and trained partners for that. Had a day on the Hill. We had many, many legislative appointments. We ended up having a sign-on letter. So again, Kelly was monitoring all of that activity over the course of a very intense legislative session. We had lots of requests from legislators, from mayors, from partners, other coalitions to come and present on school funding and why it mattered. And then we tracked all of that as well. And then in 2020, that same year, 2022, the bill passed. So then we moved into a different phase of work, which was around rulemaking, training partners to submit language on rules for the new funding formula, and testifying into the state board on those rules. And we also tracked sort of that engagement on rulemaking, which was a much smaller number of folks. A lot fewer are interested in the implementation of rulemaking at that point. And so the other way that Kelly really monitors and measures our impact is through really asking how well EdTrust-Tennessee is doing their job as a convener of an alliance. We run a statewide coalition called the Tennessee Alliance for Equity in Education. The Dollars and Cents page that was in the link is on our coalition website. And so she asks the same questions every time we have meetings with partners or webinars, and those questions are here. So the questions are consistent over time, so we can track how we're doing over time. And then this is one example of how our partners see us as a backbone organization, and to what extent do they agree that we achieve the following things. And so these are all different things that Kelly asks folks. And then we take a look at this, I would say at least quarterly in our staff meetings, and think about why answers might be what they are, right? So this is just an example of the kind of information she will give us. And it's also very, very helpful, again, for funders to see that. And then this last tool is this interesting thing she does called a network exercise. This is to really evaluate our impact on building networks. So these were the members of our School Finance Institute. Again, 11 organizations. And so before we began the Institute, she asked them to fill out a survey and talk about their connectivity to the other organizations in the Institute. And so the thicker the line, the deeper their connection, right? And if they've never had any kind of connection, there's no line. So you can see that before our Institute began, you can see how well they coordinated with one another. And then after the Institute was over, you can see that she did the survey again, that there was much more connectivity among members, across members. They were collaborating much more frequently with more intensity. And then she added, for the third one, she added, if you include EdTrust, what was our role in this network? And you can see that our role was integral to the sort of networking of this network. So this is just a way to demonstrate the role that we play in connecting organizations from all parts of the state to sort of pursue a common agenda. So I'm going to stop there and ask folks if they have questions about my presentation or any of the tools that we use. I just want to open the floor up. Go ahead. Ben, do you want to ask your question?
Yes, sorry. Thanks, Jeannie. This was super. I'm based in Washington State. I'm a policy director at an organization called Foundation for Tacoma Students. I wanted to ask about the case study example you gave around K-12 finance reform in Tennessee. And you mentioned in your kind of timeline overview that the governor surprisingly kind of accelerated the timeline. Can you unpack that a little bit? Like, was it like a new governor that came in with kind of like big ideas, or like how did that happen? Or was it just sort of serendipitous?
Well, he had a state commissioner of education that he appointed who was bullish on funding reform. And she really, really wanted, and we had obviously been pushing for funding reform, thinking it would take a number of years to get there because it's such a monumental change. And I think she was really the driver. She was the one that convinced him that this would be a risk he should take, that they could pull it off. Of course, this was deep in the pandemic still. There was flush with a lot of money from federal ESSER dollars. There was a lot of money in the state, so there was a lot of money in our rainy day fund at that point. So it was easier to redo the formula and add a ton more money to the formula so that everybody got more money. And so we did not expect it to happen in October of that year. We thought it would be after he was reelected for a second and final term. So his term started in 2019. So, yeah. Other questions about anything I shared here? Do we use the logic model to organize internal strategic plans and set new policy agendas? That's a good question. I would say we definitely use it as we think about, creating we create a new policy agenda every year. And so when we establish that policy agenda, we definitely take a look at some of the dynamics that we have in place. What are the resources we have? Do we have a window of opportunity? Do we have the right champions for something? I don't know that we line up the logic model per se against our policy agenda, but I think it is steeped now in how we operate. So it is part of sort of our background.
If I can ask one quick follow-up on that logic model, Jeannie. I love it. Is there like a tool for developing a logic model like this that you would recommend?
Yeah, what I mentioned earlier, the Kellogg Foundation has a very comprehensive resource on building a logic model. They're not for advocacy per se, right? They can be just for nonprofits in general. You're absolutely welcome to use our logic model, right? That's why I shared it. You're welcome to replicate it for your own purposes.
Thank you.
There's a lot of logic models in the universe, and they have similar elements, but they can be designed differently. Emily, I don't know if you want to move to the Q&A at this point, if people have more questions.
Yes, sorry, I was posting the Kellogg Foundation's
Oh, there you go.
model development in the chat. So that is a great resource, as Jeannie mentioned, if people are interested. It is long, but it could be helpful.
It sounds old. It's from 2004, but it is really, really good. Highly recommend.
Awesome. Well, yeah, Jeannie, I would love to just move in a few questions that I have that hopefully will answer some other questions for people as well about your work in Tennessee. First of all, I mean, your work is incredibly impressive, and it's so exciting that you're integrating this like so heavily into your advocacy campaigns. I guess I'm wondering, because you're very fortunate in that you have someone who can dedicate their full time and their resources to this specific work. But in some smaller organizations, maybe there isn't the resources or the time capacity on the part of the staff to, have this be their life. So I'm just wondering how organizations can start thinking about measuring the impact in their work, maybe without a dedicated consultant on board. Is it the same process? Are there smaller things that can be done by organizations without having to dive like so far into it?
I mean, I think, like I said in my opening, everybody's responsible for something in evaluation. Our communications associate is responsible for monitoring our social media use and our website activity and media mentions. And our government relations person is responsible for tracking bills and appointments and champion development, all of that. So everybody has a role to play. They need to understand that they have a role to play, and they understand how that works. And again, you don't have to have fancy software to do all of this. It can be very Excel spreadsheet, Google Sheets. It can be whatever it needs to be. But I think you have to build in your cadence as a team. So if you say quarterly or whatever, twice a year, we're going to stop and do a deep dive and look at all of the sort of things that we're tracking, right? It's not hard to create a survey for a webinar that you're going to do. I strongly urge you to use similar or the same questions almost every time. Otherwise, you won't be tracking the same thing over time. And so it's really important to know what you want to measure and make sure your surveys are short, to the point, and that people are doing them, right? So there's a lot of tricks to that too. But I do think it's just a matter of people understanding what are my goals for my particular lane of my work in this organization, and how am I going to measure that? And then I'm responsible for keeping up with that. I used to have staff that would block out 2 hours every Friday just to update their logs on appointments and meetings that they've had, just to make sure they're downloading that, reflecting on that, to make sure it's up to date. It requires, again, it can't be an afterthought. You will miss a lot of things if you try to go back and look at your calendar and try to remember what you did. It's much better to do it throughout and build it into your routine.
Gotcha. Yeah, it seems like it's a team-wide effort. This is not all on one person, and it takes dedication, but it's truly worth it. That definitely makes sense. I know that we have a few other questions from we have one question from the Q&A that I saw that I wanted to uplift, which is great because I was going to ask something similar, which is, how do you maintain momentum once you review the evaluation results? I guess adding on to that too, how do you use the results of your impact measurement to inform your future work in the space?
So I'll give a good example here. Somebody on my team named Maylee Powell, she's over all of our partnerships and engagement, and she conducts one-on-one interviews with every one of our partners in the late fall into, like, I'd say October to December. We're talking about 75 interviews, a lot of interviews. And she takes it very seriously. And she has a protocol for that she designed with Kelly. And she uses the same protocol and sticks to it with every interview, so that she is getting the same kind of information person to person. asking the same questions. And those, a lot of those questions are things like, where do you need support? What kind of capacity building could we offer you? Where are things we could improve? What are you working on? What are your priorities? Those kinds of things. And then from that, Kelly, and all that's done online, she's filling it out as she's talking. And then Kelly will synthesize that and lift up the things where people need help. And so 2 years ago, we heard in our one-on-ones that people needed help understanding things like, what's the difference between a C3 and a C4? How do you have a successful meeting with a legislator? How does the legislature work? How does a bill become a law? Like the basics, right? What we consider the basics are not the basics for some people. And so we created a whole advocacy hub and set of trainings on those very specific things that people ask for, right? Had we not sat down and asked people what they needed and wanted, we wouldn't have known. We wouldn't have done any of that. So those interviews were essential for us. And another one, we have a whole youth voice initiative called Empower Ed, and Kelly interviews every single one of the students in our leadership programs. And out of that, we learned what things they enjoyed, what things they didn't enjoy, what do they want to do more of, we were actually not tapping them as much as they wanted to be tapped. We were not putting them out there as much as they wanted to be out there. So had we not asked, we wouldn't have known that. And so those kind of interviews and she takes that time to do that. Now, staff can also do those interviews. You don't have a Kelly to do it, but it is important to ask how things are going for the people you're working closely with.
I love that too, because I think it shows you where your blind spots are in the work that you might not have noticed otherwise.
Right. That's right.
So it's not just, you figuring out whether your work is having the impact that it is, but also trying to understand if it isn't, why is that? Or where could you be more impactful in a space?
Right. Mm-hmm.
That's great. I think we have another question from Jen. Hi, Jen. Good to see you. She was wondering about participation rates for surveys. And if not, how do you follow up if you have some lower participation rates? And then kind of combined with that, do you see survey and interview fatigue from people? And how do you combat that, if so?
We don't do a ton of interviews, right? We do one or two a year. And again, it's not everybody. Mainly tries to hit everybody. But one of the things we do is if we're doing a webinar or a meeting, and we say, okay, we have a survey in the chat, right? We say, we're going to sit here quietly for 2 minutes while you do it, right? And we don't do it 2 minutes before the meeting's over. We do it like 10 minutes before the meeting's over. So that, because people log off early and so forth. And so if you just say, we're going to just sit quietly, this survey will take you 1 minute, and then they're much more likely to do it. It's much harder to follow up and get people to do it. So yeah, it's a perpetual challenge. I'm sure there's survey fatigue. I've got survey fatigue. I mean, we all get those inboxes. Tell us how we're doing, that thing. Anyway, but, I think people, if there's a lot of trust between you and the other organization and the individuals and people now know who Kelly is, and they know that Kelly's really trying to help strengthen our alliance and the work we're doing. I think Kelly's also done some of our trainings. She's trained people how to use a logic model, how to evaluate their work. So they trust her and they want to help her. So.
Yeah. I also imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, but you mentioned before that you're using some of the answers from those surveys, right? So I hope if people see that this is, information you're actually using and not just collecting for no reason,
Right.
maybe you're more likely to. And
we say that explicitly. We are offering this because you asked for it, right? We are doing this because you wanted it, right? Mm-hmm. We give out sub-grants every year, and we also interview and survey them. And Kelly just gave us a mid-year she does a mid-year check-in with each of them, and gave us the results, which were very, very helpful. And it turns out they want to meet more than we meet with them. Mm-hmm. Who knew, right? And they want to be more engaged with one another than we provide. And so that's the kind of information that's very, very helpful to us.
Mm. Yeah. We have another question in the chat, which was, how do you manage expectations for what your organization can provide as far as assistance? I assume as it relates to asking people what you can do for them. how do you manage expectations after you've asked that question?
It's tough because when you ask people, what do you need? The first thing they say is funding. And we don't, that's not something we can do. And people also want workshops on fundraising. And we have not done that necessarily. We haven't done that at all, I don't think. But there are some things we're just not going to, do necessarily. One of the things that we get a lot of requests for are data and analysis. So like we'll have, for example, our Tennessee NAACP very close partner is trying to work on combating this third grade retention law, and they want us to basically download and do all this analysis on third grade proficiency and testing, which is a lot of work for our team. And so what we've started to do now is we've pivoted and tried to get Vanderbilt University Peabody master students to be paired with some of these organizations as fellows for practicum to take that sort of off of our plate and have them learn how to use graduate students to do some of that work. But it is we just have a lot of partners that don't have an advocacy person, don't have a legislative affairs person, don't have these people, and we kind of fill in for them. So that's tough.
Yeah, you're doing a lot of work for a lot of different people.
Mhm.
But you're wonderful for taking it on and for supporting them. And I guess that's what builds strong partnerships, right? If you're
Right. That's right.
I want to turn a little bit. You've reflected a little bit on what this process looks like, but I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you found difficult in measuring impact, especially at the start of this work. What were some of the hurdles that you faced in getting this off the ground, or maybe even currently after you've done it for a little while? And how did you respond to some of those challenges?
There's this thing that's called paralysis by analysis. I think Jesse Jackson said that. Anyway, so you can get really bogged down if you do a lot of this kind of work and spend a lot of time looking at data and results and all the things. And so I think the leaders of your organizations have to balance what's really important here. What do we really need to focus on? And let's take some action based on what we're hearing instead of just getting sort of mired down in the details. But frankly, I think it's probably unusual for most organizations to have more information than they need or want to deal with. Most people don't have enough information, and so I would say it's really taking the leap from gathering the information, thinking about it, digesting it, and moving to changing behavior. It's very easy to keep doing the same thing over and over, even if you know that people aren't coming as much as you thought they would, responding the way you thought they would. You kind of keep doing the same thing. It's really important to, be honest with yourselves. If something's not working, like, what are people saying? What are we hearing? Let's change it. I think also it takes some time to learn how to translate the results you're getting and all of that information into meaningful narrative for funding reports, for example, or for impact reports. So understanding what's important to include, what's important to leave out, how do you paint a picture through the data that you have that is compelling for a prospective funder, for a current funder, or whoever, right, that is interested in your work. It's really important to be able to do that well, and that doesn't happen automatically. So
I love that you brought up the point of, changing course based on this information if you need to, because, we're asking for it and we want the results and we all think that we're doing great work, of course. But we have to be humble and acknowledge that this, we exist to do the work for others and we want it to have an impact. And if it's not having the impact, why are we doing it in the first place?
that's right.
So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about a time maybe when you received some feedback on a project that you were doing or a work that you were undertaking that wasn't what you had hoped, and how you kind of shifted course to meet the moment.
I'll give a very concrete, painful example. So last year in Tennessee, in this month, well, I think it might have been exactly a year ago last week, we had a terrible school shooting in Nashville, right? And we had 6 people die. And that was also then followed quickly by the Tennessee 3, if anybody remembers the 3. 2 of our legislators were expelled. And anyway, the whole thing was very messy and very painful. And the school shooting was on, I guess, on a Monday. Our day on the Hill was 2 days later. And we also had an event that night. We were giving some awards to legislators, but we were taking students up on the Hill to meet with legislators. It was a very tense time. There were a ton of folks protesting outside of the legislature for gun control. It was just a very emotionally intense time to bring students up there. And, we thought our students were ready and prepared for meetings with legislators and prepared for conversations that would occur. And I mean, obviously you can't prepare for a school shooting, but it turns out we had not done what we needed to do to prepare students to go into meetings with, frankly, with very conservative lawmakers who were uninterested in the stories and the needs of our students. It also happened to be the day that we went up there. I'm not making this up. It was Confederate Heritage Day. Almost every one of our students were students of color. So it was a really hostile environment to bring students into for a whole host of reasons. And these are students we've been working with for over a year. We had set monthly sessions with them. They were leading projects. We had great relation. Anyway. And so, the feedback after that day on the Hill was that they said we would do it again, right? Because we said, oh, we need to just not bring students to the Hill. This is just not a good deal. It's not safe. It's not a good idea to bring students. And they said, no, absolutely, we must go. One of the students said, out of pain comes purpose. But we have spent a lot of time reevaluating how we train students to go up on the Hill, how much time we put into that, role-playing meetings with legislators, role-playing. We actually walk up to the legislature beforehand with a lot of the students to just get a feel for the building. It's a very intimidating setting. If you've ever been in the legislature or in Congress, it's very intimidating. It's a lot of white people with a lot of power, and it's very intimidating. And so we really had to just name all of that and really build up their confidence. And so they were very transparent with us after that day on all the ways they didn't feel ready. And so we took that very seriously. I mean, it was a huge soul-searching moment for us. Very, very painful. But we did our Down the Hill last year and had 70 students, and it went great. And we were ready. But it took a really difficult day for us to take that work very, very seriously. So.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm
Yeah.
sure that that's hard to
It was
think
tough.
about again.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, all I can say is our young people are the most amazing people we have, and the
Totally.
fact that they were going to go back and were a game to go into an environment where they clearly were not wanted is just a
Mm-hmm.
testament to how important this work is and how important our young people are to it.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Sorry, I'm taking a breath. I
Well,
wasn't even there.
I'll tell you a good story out of that. One of the students that went last year, Caleb Tsai, brilliant, from Memphis, brilliant, was a senior. He'd been working with us for years. This is a student as a freshman. His signature line had, like Caleb Tsai, vice president of 9th grade student government. I mean, that kind of kid, right? He was focused on leadership. And so now he's a freshman at Columbia University in New York. Right. And we said, we're having our Day on the Hill. He goes, I want to come back. We have a partner that was having a rally the same day as our Day on the Hill against our voucher bill. They had 300 people outside of the legislature. And they asked if we had a student that could speak. And Caleb went and spoke to the 300 people in a rally outside. Right. And I mean, he was the one that went in the bathroom at the legislature last year with the guy with the hat that said, I love the Confederacy. And he's Black. I mean, he didn't have to come back. No reason for him to come back. And he not only came back, but then he led a speech at a rally. So just can't underestimate their resilience. Not everybody has that resilience, but boy, it's inspiring to see. So
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, that's incredible. And I mean, of course, that is certainly a testament to him, but I think it's also a testament to your work and the fact that you took this information on how you did and really used it to think critically about your own practices and didn't just, brush it aside as not fitting the right situation. And thank God you didn't, abandon this idea of having students there at the legislator because it's such a powerful message, but you wouldn't have known how to do that without the information from the impact measurement study. So just to tie it all back, that was my attempt at
Good
that.
job.
We only have time for, I think, one more question before we wrap it up today. So if there are any others from those in the audience, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm just going to wait a second because I don't want to take over the space. I always have more questions, but want to see if there are others who have ones before I ask my closing question. I'm not seeing any, so I'm just gonna ask if you could, um, ending on a note of you, I think you've talked very clearly about how this impact measurement has really informed all aspects of your work, and how integral it is to the whole system of what you do. And I'm just wondering if you have any last pieces of advice or guidance for those who might see the system that you've created, and think it's amazing, but also think it's a lot, and might be a little overwhelmed. How do you start this work? What should you keep in mind when you're doing it? Yeah, I guess I'll end with that.
I mean, I think start small. Don't wait for a fiscal year change or a calendar year change. You can start now. I think, what are the 3 or 4 big things you want to accomplish as an organization? What are the 3? And those could be including internal ones, keeping staff, right? Promoting staff. It can also be external goals. And so what are 1 or 2 ways to measure each of those goals and just stick to that, right? Don't you have to, have a comprehensive list of different ways to do that. You could do an annual survey. You could do an internal staff survey. You could, hire someone to, graduate student in evaluation to come in and do some of your interviews, to have an unbiased kind of whatever person. But decide what are the goals that are most important, and then how do you want to measure those? And then what's the story that you will tell about that in a year, right? What have you learned in a year? Does it make you change your goals, or did you have the right goals? So
Well, thank you so much, Jeannie, for taking the time to be with us today, for being so open and honest about your work. You're truly an inspiration to me personally, but I think to a lot of people, I know to a lot of people. And I'm just so excited to continue to see you guys fight the good fight in Tennessee and continue to partner with you. So thank you so much for being with us today.
thank you, Emily. Thanks for all your hard work.
With that, I'm just going to close with a few final thoughts before we wrap it up for the day. Thank you again for being with us. Give me 2 seconds to share my screen. Are people seeing what I'm seeing? Hopefully.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, in the spirit of what Jeannie just said, if we can just take a moment, we produce these events for you all. We want to make sure that we're having the best impact that we can have, and that doesn't work unless we know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. So if you could just take 2 seconds to look at this QR code, or scan this QR code rather, and just answer 1 or 2 yes or no questions for us. It takes no more than a minute, I promise. We really want to make sure that future events are just as helpful for you all as hopefully this one was. Shayna's also posted the link in the chat, which is super helpful. So I am just going to practice my silence for a moment, and let everyone take a second to fill it out, and then I'll provide a few closing resources before we leave. All right, hopefully that's given people a little bit of time. If you're not done, please feel free to continue. We would love to get your feedback, but going to move on to a few quick resources. As a reminder, this series was put on by the Alliance for Resource Equity, which is a partnership between us, Education Trust, and Education Resource Strategies. We work to advance education equity through resource equity in the states. So we do that through creating toolkits, through webinars like this one, through research and information. If you're interested in learning more about us and about our work, we really encourage you to check out our website, which is posted there, as well as just to subscribe to our newsletter. We have a whole host of tools that can help walk you through every single step of creating a resource equity campaign in your community. So really suggest you check those out if you have a second. And if you missed the first two sessions in this series, they will be posted on our website momentarily, but they're also on our YouTube page at the Education Trust. Our first session was on measuring or on data collection and how that can inform resource equity campaigns. And our second was on messaging. So if you're interested in either of those, they dive into some concrete tools that ARE has produced to help you in using data for advocacy and in messaging for resource equity. So really highly recommend watching those as well. And this is just a little bit about our partners. So with that, thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you to our wonderful guest speaker, Gini, for taking the time to share her thoughts. We will send a follow-up email with a lot more information and resources, etc. But we appreciate your time today and hope you have a great rest of the day. We hope to see you at a future EdTrust event. Bye.
Thanks, Emily. We'll see you later.